The first thing I wanted to just say, I had the pleasure of meeting Stan over a dozen years ago when we were both rookies in the ticket booths of Mayfair. And we all know how brilliant Father Peter is, but he's also very clever. Stan, it was my understanding as your Mayfair treasurer a couple of years ago that Stan successfully managed to move on from ticket sales into an interesting new area. I believe it was the food court. But Father Peter, in his commendation today to Stan, said he's actively involved with ticket sales. So Stan, welcome back. I'm thrilled. All right, good morning now, good afternoon, I guess. And thank you for being here today, taking your time to review our 2024 financial report. My expectation is I'll be efficient here, maybe 12 minutes of your time. I'm keenly aware of the challenges you face in digesting all these figures in real time, but I will do my best to highlight to you those figures that I think are most relevant to our financial condition. All of this and more will be posted on our website, so I encourage you to take time to review it there because there's many, many facts and figures. I'm available, of course, to you via email or telephone should you have any questions. And a spoiler alert, but you've already heard it, the news today that we're reporting is good news. Treasurers aren't known to be recruited as cheerleaders, but I'm going to do my best to be very optimistic because there's reason for that. On our agenda, okay, we're going to take a look at the brief look at the economic context we find ourselves in that impact our financials, a look at our endowment and trust funds, an update on our capital campaign inspired by love, which, as you've heard, is entering its final year for fulfillment, a review of our 2024 financial results and the approved budget for 2025, our current balance sheet in terms of liquidity, a look back at the year's highlights from deep within the Treasury Department's research laboratory. You didn't know that existed. It's way down below our basement. And finally, our objectives for the coming year, okay? So first, let's take a look at inflation. This is a deep history. We're going back 35 years, which is pretty much the duration of my career in financial markets. After experiencing COVID-related increases in inflation to as much as 8% or more in 22 and 23, inflation in general here in recent times has moderated and stabilized to a range of 2.5% to 3% for a number. Okay, here's a chart of interest rates. With that moderation in inflation, the Federal Reserve Bank, which had been increasing short-term rates to fight the surge in inflation, commenced a series of rate decreases in 2024, which we can see in blue here, the targeted FOMC overnight rate. As the year came to a close, the Fed had lowered Fed funds target rate by 100 basis points to 4 3/8%. Longer-term rates, however, in this case, our proxy is in red. We're using the 10-year Treasury yield. Longer-term rates actually increased over the course of the year. You can see that. In recent weeks, the longest dated 30-year Treasury bond flirted with the 5% yield level. Market participants, it seems to me, are unsure of the impact to the economy and the federal budget of tariffs and potential tax cuts being considered by our new leadership in Washington. Rising interest rates are a headwind for economic growth and produce losses for our existing fixed income investments. However, the flip side of the coin is they provide more attractive returns for new money put to work in that asset class. St. Mark's continues to benefit from interest income we realize on our general reserves, which are invested in overnight monies. Turning to the stock market, 2024 was a year of solid returns. Again, this is 35 years of history with all kinds of epics that we recall that achieved a name in the markets. And more recently is this tremendous upswing that we see. In this graph, we look at share prices on a logarithmic scale where the slope of a straight line reflects a constant rate of return. And distances along the x-axis are equal differences in percentage change. So again, we've had a strong 2024. That said, metrics like price earnings ratios and dividend yields reflect the optimism in the market in the form of valuation expansion. Might we see a 20% correction in the unforeseen future? No doubt we will, but when and from what level? Remember that we outsource the management of our endowment, and our managers are by intent not engaging in market timing. So should that happen, it happens. Nothing we can do about it. Okay, in terms of our endowment and trust, I remind you that we have two major categories of long-term invested funds. Our endowment managed by the Bank of America as part of the Episcopal Church in Connecticut's Donations and Bequests Fund, and our beneficial share in the Lancaster Trust, which is managed by Deutsche Bank. As you will recall, we currently are engaged in adding funds to our D&B endowment via donations received from the Inspired by Love Capital campaign. The Lancaster Trust Fund is static in that there are no external funds added to it, and we have effectively no say in its management. We draw income from both on a monthly basis into our operations. Increasing our D&B endowment is a significant component of our strategy to help address what in recent years had been a fairly stagnant level of pledged income, as Janet has told us. At the end of 2024, our D&B endowment was at $9.5 million, shown here in red, and the Lancaster Trust was just under $2 million in brown. The combined total of $11.5 million was up $1.6 million over December of 2023. Overall, we see in the pie chart, overall the combined portfolios held 69% in equities at the end of the year. Lancaster Trust, the more aggressively positioned of the two, held almost 83% in equities, compared to D&B at 66%. Further underscoring the riskier stance of the Lancaster Trust, 26% of the overall portfolio, 26 of the total, was invested in the U.S. information technology sector. And half of that, about 13% of the entire portfolio, was held in the single stock NVIDIA, which is in the news regularly because it's just had an incredible run. So good for D&B, but it is the riskier of the two, because if we are in a downturn, we will suffer the flip side of that coin. Okay, this slide here is just a summary of the flow of funds in and out of D&B and Lancaster Trust for 2024. Okay, so we see that we started at just under 10 million. We had additions through the IBL campaign of 739,000. Our draw between the two totaled nearly 475,000. Market income and gain added 1.3, and we ended up at 11.5. Again, 1.6 increase over where we started. At the bottom are just some indicators of market indicators. We see the S&P 500 had a huge year. It's market cap weighted, and it's highly concentrated in IT. So in some sense, it's very similar to the Lancaster Trust. So it outperformed other measures like the Russell 2000, which is an equal weighted measure. It returned 10% in terms of the index price change over the year. The Russell 2000 is a more appropriate proxy for the type of investing that Donations and Bequests engages in. We already mentioned that the Fed funds target rate was lowered by 100 basis points. The most recent meeting this past week, they paused, so we'll see what happens there. But even though they lowered 100 basis points in overnight funds, the U.S. two-year Treasury note was unchanged on the year at 4.25%. And the 10-year note actually increased, as we mentioned earlier, in this case by 72 basis points to almost 4.6%. This slide you've already seen for the most part. Janet shared with you. There's a little slightly different spin in terms of the information on it, but the content is the same. We're almost 3/4 fulfilled in receipts from pledges on the IBL campaign. We have just under 2.1 million outstanding. And of that, almost 1.4 million will end up heading, adding to the endowment, the D&B, and another almost 700,000 will go towards our capital expenditures. On hand, from a capital perspective, we've basically spent everything that we've received so far. So you can see we have a small amount. I'll take the moment, you've heard this already, that this is our final year for fulfillment. As it turns out, our calculation for the draw has a fiscal year that ends on October 31st. Your fiscal year, of course, from a tax perspective, ends like the calendar on December 31st. So most of us tend to start thinking about those donations in the month of December. But in terms of getting those funds in and making them impactful as soon as possible to our draw calculation, if we can get those pledges in before October 31st, that will be greatly appreciated. Okay, an update on our endowment draw forecast. We present this every year for the last couple of years. The D&B calculation is separate from the Lancaster Trust. I mentioned Lancaster Trust. We sort of have no say over it. We can make requests to increase the draw, which is what we do, but there's no calculation, there's no formula, as opposed to the D&B portion of our funds. It's formulaic. It uses, at October 31st, the preceding 12 quarters, average share price, looks at the number of shares we own, the product of the two, creates a basis from which we apply a percentage to draw from. So last year's numbers included these light gray numbers all the way to this point, actually October of 23. And at this point, a year ago, I gave you a forecast of a band, these gray bars, predicting where we thought those share prices would fall in 2024. And as it turns out, they fell within that range. So our calculation this year that was just done on October 31st used all the blue diamond figures. We are forecasting a single point forecast going forward in red with these squares at a 6.5% rate of increase for the share price. Bottom line is, down at the bottom, what we expect our draw, including an estimate for the Lancaster Trust to be. As Janet mentioned, for 2025, we are scheduled to draw 505,000 between the two. And by 2028, we expect that our forecast is that figure will have increased by over 25% to just over 632,000, as it turns out. Okay, be real quick on this. This is slide 10. So these are our pie charts for sources and uses of funds for 2024 and some history behind it. In 2024, 69%, as you've heard from Janet, our revenue came from pledge, gift, and plate, and 18% in green came to our operations via the draw between the two sources. In general, over time, the green, the endowment draw, has been increasing, and the pledge and plate component has been decreasing as a ratio. So for example, in 2019, our draw was 10.6% of revenue. You see 2024, it was 18%, and by 2027, we expect it to be almost actually double the level it was in 2019, so at over 22% of our income. In terms of expenses, again, similar chart describing where our expenses fall. We are clearly a people business, right? Both in terms of revenue, 69%, and in terms of expenditure. 64% of our monies go to staffing our mission, our ministries and operations. Okay, this is the big one.
There's plenty of copies of it on the table.
Yes, thank you. So lots and lots of data here, and I know it is a challenge to digest in the here and now, let alone for some of you in the room. I know you're probably struggling to even see the numbers before you on the screen. So while I want to make it simple and large as possible, I also don't want to eliminate what I think are very valuable pieces of information, like percentage shares in blue of totals, like change year on year in red. So even though the data is summarized here, it's still fairly dense. I get that. But please take the time to spend with this once it's posted online. In the interim, I will do my best to point to you what I think are the most important aspects. So last year, the 2024 budget is not on here, but last year when we met, we did not have an adopted budget, in part because we didn't like it at all. Our bottom line, if those of you may recall, was for a deficit of over $100,000. That was just felt that's not acceptable. We have to do something about this. Hence Janet's appeal last year for your pledges for 2024, and you responded tremendously. So thank you for that. By the time our vestry did adopt a budget, we had improved that over $100,000 deficit to a deficit of $49,000. So not shown here, but our budgeted deficit for 2024 was $49,000 in deficit. Way down here at the bottom, you can see our current estimate. Yes. Our current estimate for the year is, as was said, to finish in the black by over $50,000. An incredible accomplishment. How did we do that? We finished with several positive revenue surprises versus our budget. Stewardship and gift giving surpassed the budget by some $66,000. Plate and 2023, the prior year stewardship funds received in the first quarter of 24 actually exceeded budget, what we had in the budget, by another $18,000. Mayfair was a $25,000 surprise to the positive over what we had budgeted, and interest income here in the all other category turned out to be another $25,000 over what we had budgeted. All told, our positive revenue surprises added up to $135,000 over what we had budgeted. On the expense side, a positive financial surprise came in for the wrong reason. And that was, I think, as you've heard, Father Peter spoke to it as well, that we lost an administrative employee early in the year, and we're not able to replace that employee. So comp and benefits that came in were estimated at $1.62 million here. We're actually $32,000 under budget, in large part for that reason. Negative surprises on the expense came in utilities. You see our utilities came in for the year at just over $150,000, and our budget for the year was $110,000. So a $40,000 hit there, almost entirely due to a pretty sizable, over 40% increase in our electricity rates. We have contractual rates for our electricity for a period of time that expired. We had a new rate. It was significantly higher. You've probably all seen that at home. Other expense surprises to the negative came in at $25,000 over budget. In total, expense surprises were $33,000 over budget, the net of those two. That netted against the $135,000 positive surprise to revenue. We ended up turning that $49,000 budgeted deficit into that surplus of over $51,000. So fantastic year. Thank you all. I mean, folks really responded to the appeal for pledging and gifts, and even more so for 2025. So turning to 2025 for the budget, as we've heard from Janet, our stewardship campaign is doing very well. Our goal is 1.85 million, as you've heard. However, for the budget before you here, which is in green on the right, our staff with the green eye shades down in the Treasury Department knocked the 185 goal back to 1.8 million. They tend to be a little conservative perhaps, but I think that's a reasonable estimate. So that combined with a plate of $45,000 in the budget and an expectation we'll receive another $30,000 of late 2024 pledge commitments that show up in the first quarter of 2025 gets us to this 1.875 million revenue figure, okay, which is a 3.8% increase over 2024, and that in turn was a strong year. So a type of increase we've not seen in recent years, but we did it in 24. We're well on our way to doing it in 25. Mayfair, 110,000. We know that can swing one way or the other as the weather swings. Our total budget revenue for 25 is 2.7 million, 2.8% increase over the prior year, which in itself was a significant increase over 2023. On the expense side, comp and benefits shown here at 1,763. Again, hard to see, but that if we look at that rate of increase over 24, that's 8.8%. However, that's an apples and oranges comparison. As we spoke about, our realized figure of 162 in comp and benefits for 24 was without one administrative employee. So the proper comparison is to look at 25 budget versus 24 budget, which included that employee. So the increase is not, the relevant increase is 6.7% if we look at it budget to budget. Total budget expenses are budgeted to increase 3.7%. Excuse me, that's not right, 5.5% over 2024. And our bottom line that shows with these figures is for a deficit of $16,000. That amount is effectively a rounding error on a $2.7 million budget. It could easily swing by a few tens of thousands, as we've seen. So I feel very comfortable with that. It's effectively balanced, particularly if we look at our history. If we go back at our net from 2020 through 2024, that's 5 years worth of nets, and these figures add up to a positive if you look at the bottom line. I feel like we're in great shape financially. This slide, a quick look at our liquidity. We take our cash and securities from the balance sheet and remove these items, which are held in this case for the preschool, held for other reasons. We get to sort of a proxy for our liquidity, our free liquidity of $837,000. That said, of that amount at year end, $325,000 were 2025 pledges that were received by the end of 2024. Net that out, we get a 500,000-ish figure. Okay, a review of highlights from last year. We added 3, what I think are pretty significant and helpful reporting tools. One is the stewardship dashboard, which helps us report and estimate progress on our stewardship campaign. Closely related to that is a giving forecast that uses historical patterns on monthly pledge gift and plate receipt to estimate where our current year revenues to date will end up by the end of the year. We also instituted a 3-year operating forecast model for use in decision-making by our leadership, our various committees, Finance Committee and the Investment Endowment Committee, and by the vestry. We moved bill payment to bill.com, which is a service that provides processing and approval of bill payment, but more significantly allows recipients of those payments to opt to receive them via physical check or via ACH or a number of other alternatives, which they on their end set up. So it saves us the resource, which is very, very thin, that resource of having to go out to individual vendors and arrange for ACH paperwork, et cetera. So this is a great way to move with ease from physical checks, which are in this day and age are insecure, basically, represent security hazards, I should say. So that's a great development. Finally, we enhanced integration with St. Mark's preschool financial leadership. So I'm passionate about this. This is something, if I accomplish any particular one thing, or help, I should say, to accomplish, it's this. Our preschool is fantastic. We know that, but we haven't been as integrated with them as we think we should be. So that's a perfect segue into our 2025 objectives. I'll jump right down here to the next to the last, which is the preschool. They've long had on their agenda to update their bylaws. Again, it's been on our agenda as well. And again, it's a resource issue, like many things. We haven't gotten to it. We want to get to it desperately. It's our objective for 2025. We have one employee retention tax credit that remains outstanding, approximately $111,000. I'm sure seen in the press, there's been a lot of fraud associated with that, not related obviously to us, but that fraud has caused the IRS to slow roll the whole thing. And as near as I can tell, it effectively has stopped in terms of processing. They still owe us the money. They owed us that last year. I don't know what's going to happen there, but we stay tuned. We have tremendous leadership on our investment and endowment committee, some of whom have agreed to stay on. But as folks roll off of that, we need to add members. Cash flow management for our capital projects, as you saw on an earlier slide, the monies we've received from IBNL committed to capital projects have largely been used. So we have projects that need doing, and we're waiting on funds to come in, but there's a little bit of a coordination there that we need to do. You've already heard about increasing usage of ACH using bill.com. And continued improvements. This is not just a fluffy general thing. This is very active. You know, we have introduced this past year some pretty nice new tools for us to use, and we're constantly, principally Jill and I, are talking about what can we do better and how can we do it. So lastly, you guys, you know, I'm preaching to the choir. You guys know this. The membership is incredible. Our committee members are brilliant. We all benefit from them, and I've listed as many as I could think of here. And I'm sure there are others. Certainly, there are others who've served prior to that. That's the one thing I know. You talk to somebody, they're like, "Oh yeah, I was, you know, warden 15 years ago." Wow. So thank you, everybody, for your contributions. Those on this list and those who aren't. I think that's pretty much it for that I have. If there are any questions, I would do my best to answer them in the here and now. Otherwise, once you've had time to digest things, I'm available by email and phone.
Yeah.
Yes.
I don't know if endowment finished the calendar year, the two parts of the endowment. What was the total number after draw?
Thanks, Bill. So here they are in blue, the Lancaster Trust, and in green, D&B, and of course on the right are the sum of the two. And the one thing I failed to point out but meant to is that if we look at simply at where we ended versus where we started, they both, surprise, surprise, they're just under 16% in terms of end value versus start value. That said, Lancaster Trust, being the more aggressive, with big help from NVIDIA, had an income gain component that was 20% versus D&B only 11.6. So how did we get to a similar ending value in terms of percentage change? Well, that was through the donations from the IBNL campaign, which are only going into donations and bequests. And that 739,000 was 9% of the starting value.
So Tim, it's fair to say we're at 11.4 million at the end of the year. That's the first time we've been above 10 million, isn't it?
That is, yeah.
Congratulations.
Thank you, Bill. As if I had anything to do with it. I'm just a bean counter. So thank you. All right. Yes.
Congratulations for getting this on budget and on time, but I'm assuming that something was left on the floor that you would have preferred to have in the budget. You would prefer for even more contribution. So just to keep us active and alert, not satisfied, what got left on the floor that you wish hadn't been left on the
Wow, that is, I mean, you guys blow me away. That is a great question. So to that end, we considered a month or two ago that when it came to budgeting, we really, how about we have two budgets, right? One which represents what we would like to accomplish. And of course, that would include probably somebody like a communications director, or as an example, right? Somebody who could help us with materials and communicating, et cetera. And so we'll do one budget, which is if we could be fully funded, this is how we'd like to operate. And then we'll do another one that's more like what we're accustomed to, which is, well, this is what we think is more real world. So great question. We did not produce those two budgets, in part, again, resource, who's going to do that? But we've had many conversations along those lines, including a member of the Investment Endowment Committee, Matt LeBaron, who sent me an email with some suggestions right along those lines of how we could plan for the future financially, particularly using the endowment as a tool for funding that scenario of what we would like to accomplish. So, it's staffing, really, but it's also repairs around the campus. I mean, this campus is tremendous, and we all know as homeowners what it costs to operate and repair and maintain roofs and things like that. So it's those two things. It's staff and it's capital expenditures. Thank you.